Hey guys, it's 2.2 step 4 and this is an aspire to do, and I'm talking about the themes in this video. A reminder of our learning target. Our learning target is that uh, our objective is students will be able to analyze, narrate, or voice characters and setting. And so themes really are a way for us to, I think, move beyond analysis and get to interpretation. But I think it's a helpful spot for us to start talking about it right now. And so that's why I've made this video and aspire to do. What key themes are we tracing in the things they carried? Well, there are 4 key themes, and they're listed in your notes. And now is the time for you to write a little bit about them. I've got the question, how do the 4 themes surface in the first reading, come up in your Cornell notes. So you can think about that. And I will offer some ideas, including an example of each. And then I kind of want you to reflect about this theme, because these are the rich ideas about the text that are going to be important for you to be able to write about when it comes to writing your higher level essay on this book. And so I think it's good to just start thinking about what's interesting about the theme in and of itself first. All right, so let's talk about the first one. The first is the power of voice to create truths. And this is really our organizing theme of the semester. We started the semester with you using your own voice, your writer's voice, as you told a story about yourself for college application documents in that college application essay. And we also learned about how powerful voice can be in the play Medea. It turned the world of Medea upside down, didn't it? Medea using her voice basically ended the ruling of a king and destroyed a major house of of Corinth, where the play takes place. And it allowed Medea also to enact her revenge against her enemies. In the things they carried, we're going to be looking at how storytellers create truths. We have one key storyteller, which is the narrator of the book. And for the most part, the narrator is a character named Tim O'Brien, not to be confused with the author, Tim O'Brien. But this narrator narrates from a first-person point of view, telling his story. And we see that first in the second chapter, called Love. In the very first chapter, the things they carried, we see a third-person limited omniscient narrator, and this will come up in 2 additional chapters. So watch for that narrator and take a look at how that narrator is different from... All right, so here's an example of the power of voice to create truths. First Lieutenant Jimmy Cross carried letters from a girl named Martha, a junior at Mount Sebastian College in New Jersey. Here we see the third-person narrator being used that has access to Lieutenant Jimmy Cross's thoughts, right? And so that's the omniscient part. But since it's only able to access his thoughts, it's a limited omniscient. We see this first chapter really from Lieutenant Jimmy Cross's understanding, right? It's inside of his head that we are able to see how things are in Vietnam. It makes us feel like he's probably the main character. And as we keep reading, though, we find out, oh, he's not the main character at all. So think about, how does the storyteller impact the story? What makes that first chapter different than all the others because of the point of view and the fact that we are able to see things from Lieutenant Jimmy Cross's point of view. Also, as you continue reading, watch for the other 2 chapters that are written in this third person narrative voice. Starting with Love, it's first person, and it's Tim O'Brien, the character narrating those chapters. And watch for how the use of voice affects what we understand as readers to be the truth. And this will really take us the whole book to fully understand. But as you're thinking about it, here's my reflection question for you that I want you to answer in your notes. Have you ever heard a story and you thought, wow, that's incredible, until you found out who originally told the story, and then you thought, oh, I don't believe that at all. I don't know. Maybe this has happened to you. Maybe it hasn't. I know there are certain people in my family whose stories are more credible than other people. If my dad has told a story, I know it's going to sound one way rather than if my mom has told the story. And oftentimes, if somebody else were recounting the story to me that they heard, I could even say which parent it was that was the originator of said story, because it's so sort of specific to how they see the world. So how about you? Have you found a story less believable once you learned who told it? How does the storyteller impact the story? All right, let's move on to the second theme. The burden of war stories is another key theme. I looked up burden in Merriam-Webster dictionary, and the first 2 definitions were something carried and something taken as a duty or responsibility, which I thought was very appropriate for the title of our book and the first chapter of the book, The Things They Carried. So we have the burden, the physical burden of, all of the things these soldiers carry. It really works as a motif, right, for this duty or responsibility of having experienced these moments in the war and not really knowing what to do with it, having to just carry it to bear witness to the memory. And so in the documentary that is in lesson 1, How to Tell a True War Story, Tim O'Brien talks about the fact that the stories he tells in his books, including The Things They Carried, are not war stories. He says they're stories set in war, but they're not actually about war. Well, I don't know. Is that a distinction worth making? Maybe it is if you think about it this way. The next thing he says is what the stories are really about is the human heart under intense pressure. And so here we have that word, pressure, right? This burdensome thing. How are people changed because of this intense pressure in the book? I want you to think about that when you're thinking about this theme. Page 24, we see at the end of the first chapter, Jimmy Cross. This is from his thoughts. It was very sad. He thought the things men carried inside, the things men did or felt they had to do. And so it's more than just carrying it externally, right? Humping the things they humped along the march, right? But it's also the emotions, the memories, everything else that they carry inside. And then it's interesting that the following sentence, the things men did or felt they had to do. As if carrying something inside then requires an action on the part of said carrier, right? How do those two things connect? Carrying these burdens of war stories and then the reaction, the doing. How does the burden of being responsible for the lives of 18 men affect Lieutenant Jimmy Cross? He's 24 years old. At that age, maybe The average person is finishing college, starting a career, maybe thinking about getting married. And here he's in a foreign country, and he feels responsible for the lives of almost 20 human beings. How could he possibly be responsible for them? Here's a reflection question for you to think about and to write about maybe in your notes now. Has a memory of yours ever resurfaced unexpectedly? Have you ever, all of a sudden, you're maybe walking down the street and suddenly you're remembering something that happened when you were like 8 years old, and you're like, what? Why am I remembering that? That's the kind of burden, I think, that these GIs carry because of their experiences in the Vietnam War, but their memories are, of course, of life and death circumstances. And hopefully you haven't had any of those or too many of those yet. Innocence, guilt, and redemption is another key theme in the book. Who is innocent in this book? Who is to blame? Who is guilty? And can they ever be forgiven? How can they ever be forgiven? We see this on page 24 when, again, Lieutenant Jimmy Cross, at the end of the first chapter, in his thoughts, he thinks he would accept the blame for what had happened to Ted Lavender. He would be a man about it. Well, is it really his fault that Ted Lavender died? Think about that as you read that first chapter, and think about how he could respond to it. What does it mean to be a man about it? And does he ever accept the blame? And if not, why not? Are the GIs in the book guilty to begin with? Is Lieutenant Jimmy Cross guilty of anything to begin with? And what might that be? And what could they do in order to be atoned or forgiven? Here's a reflection for you, a personal question to think about and write about in your notes. What does it take for you to forgive somebody else? Have you been wronged badly? I'm sure you have. Were you able to forgive that person? And if you were, what did it take for you to be able to forgive them? How about yourself? Have you been able to forgive yourself for some of those wrongs that you've committed? Do some writing about that. Story and imagination as creative forces is our next theme. Telling a story is an act of creation, whether it is based on a memory, something that actually happened, or not. Once you tell that story, you are creating something. And some might call that art, creating art. On page 33 in the chapter called Spin, we hear O'Brien talk about this. He says, the thing about remembering is that you don't forget. You take your material where you find it, which is in your life, at the intersection of past and present. The memory traffic feeds into a rotary up on your head where it goes in circles for a while. Then pretty soon imagination flows in and the traffic merges and shoots off down 1,000 different streets. As a writer, all you can do is pick a street and go for the ride, putting things down as they come at you. That's the real obsession, all those stories. So this is really the heart of the book in a lot of ways in terms of it being a postmodernist text, right? Because he's looking at, O'Brien, the narrator, is looking at the art of creating a story and how it is an obsession. And that implies that it's hurt him to a certain extent, right? An obsession has a negative connotation. So I want you to think about this. How does the act of creating a story or other art form, and there are others that come to play in the book, help characters in the book? How does it hurt characters in the book? Watch for that to start thinking about this theme. Here's a quote that I think is great. It's been attributed to a few different people. Gerhard Richter in the 80s, I think, is probably who actually said it. Art is the highest form of hope. Why is it that we create art in response to our condition as humans? The fact that we are mortal and we know it. right? What is the point? Why must we then create something that might be aesthetically pleasing, that's beautiful? This is something, of course, that I brought up at the very beginning of the year, thinking about Solzhenitsyn saying that beauty will save the world. How might it also be a form of hope? And think about that as it relates to the characters in the book. Do you agree with that? And that is your reflection question for the last theme. All right, thanks for watching.